Today we look at the current 108 sorceries that ramp in green. There are a lot, and surprisingly it's about the same amount as the mana dorks. I don't know, let's get into it. First off, we got Rampant Growth, Search for Tomorrow, and Untamed Wilds. Each search for a basic into play. Untapped unless you're Rampant Growth and it enters tapped, and Search for Tomorrow suspends. Deep Reconnaissance and Path to the Festival both do the same, but they've got a flashback cost, and Path to the Festival allows you to scry one when certain things happen. Map the Wastes does the same, but you bolster one as well. They went this way. Same effect, but then you investigate. Far Wanderings, it's the same once again, but if you've got Threshold, you can search for 3 basic lands on the battlefield instead and shuffle your library. Growth Spasm does the same and then makes a Scion. Edge of Autumn, same thing, but you can only do it if you have 4 or fewer lands, and it's also got cycling and you can sacrifice a land to do that. Reap and Sow, you can destroy a land or search for a land into play, or you can choose both if you entwine it. Coming Attraction, search for the basic, and then you open an attraction. Nissa's Renewal searches for up to 3 basic lands onto the battlefield tapped, and then you shuffle your library, and you gain 7 life. Nissa's Pilgrimage searches for up to 2 forests onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest into your hand. But if you got Spell Mastery, you search for up to 3 basic forests instead of 2. Verdant Confluence, you can choose the same mode more than once, but we'll just look at that last one. Search for a basic land onto the battlefield tapped. Terramorph searches for the basic, and then you shuffle, and it has Rebound, so you'll do it twice. Thunderherd Migration, you can reveal a dinosaur or pay 1 to play it, and you search for a basic on the battlefield tapped. Beanstalk Giant, but more importantly, Fertile Footsteps searches for a basic on the battlefield. Beneath the Sands searches for that basic, but it also has cycling. Return from the Wild searches for a basic land on the battlefield, and a couple other things. Scout the Wilderness searches for a basic under the battlefield tapped, and you can kick it for an additional effect. And lastly, we've got Renewal, which is probably the oldest one here, but sacrifice a land to search for a basic land and directly into play, and shuffle afterwards, and it cantrips, so you'll draw a card as well. Alright, this section is going to be all about you find a couple basics and then put one in your hand, the others on the battlefield. You know, stuff like Cultivate, Kodama's Reach, and Peregrination, which I'll do that. And Peregrination scries 1. Flare of Cultivation is the same as the last ones, but you can sacrifice a non-token green creature rather than pay its mana cost. Verdant Mastery can cost less, and you search up to 4 basic lands, reveal them, put one onto the battlefield tapped under an opponent's control if the smaller cost was paid, but you put 2 of them onto the battlefield tapped under your control and the rest into your hand. And Viewpoint Synchronization has free running, so you can cast it for a little cheaper, and you can search for up to 3 basic lands, reveal them, put 2 onto the battlefield tapped and the other into your hand, and then shuffle. 2 lands just straight to the battlefield. First off, we got Explosive Vegetation, Migration Path, and Nissa's Expedition. All search for up to 2 basic lands onto the battlefield tapped. Migration Path also has cycling, and Nissa's Expedition you can convoke. Grow from the Ashes searches for a basic into play, but if it was kicked, you can search for 2 basics into play. Fastwood Surge does the same as Grow from the Ashes, but if you kick it, you put counters on creatures as well. And Primal Growth lets us sacrifice a creature as a kicker cost, and you can search for basic land into play and then shuffle your library, but if you kicked it, instead you search for 2 of those things. You search for X lands. We've got Celebrate the Harvest, where you search for up to X basic lands, where X has a number of different powers among creatures you control on the battlefield tapped. Boundless Realms, you search for up to X basics, where X is the number of lands you control, and put them on the battlefield tapped. Traverse the Outlands searches for the same X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Harvest Season searches for X basics, where X is the number of tapped creatures you control. Scape Shift lets you sacrifice any number of lands and then search for up to that many on the battlefield tapped. Reshape the Earth searches for up to 10 land cards and puts them all on the battlefield tapped. And Rites of Spring lets you discard any number of cards and then search for your library for that many basics into your hand. So I guess this last one doesn't exactly do it onto the battlefield, but you can search for X amount basically. All right, now we've got forests directly into play. We got Nature's Lore and 3 visits. Basically the same card, same cost and everything. Munvoli Acid Moss destroys a land, and then you can search for a forest into play tapped. Field Trip searches for the basic forest card on the battlefield tapped, and then you learn. Glimpse the Core lets you choose one, but we'll just focus on the top one. You can search for a basic forest into play tapped and then shuffle. Ranger's Path and Skyshroud Claim are basically the same. Search your library for up to 2 forests onto the battlefield. Skyshroud Claim untapped and Ranger's Path tapped. Hunting Wilds lets you search for up to 2 forests on the battlefield tapped, but if it was kicked, you do something else as well. And now we move on to stuff into our hand. Attune with Aether, Lay of the Land, and Many Partings. Search for a basic into your hand. Attune with Aether gives you energies, and Many Partings makes you food. Bushwhack and Thirsting Roots lets you search for a basic into your hand, and they have a second mode as well. Brave the Wilds searches for a basic into hand, and you can bargain it if you'd like. Caravan Vigil searches for a basic, but you can put it onto the battlefield instead of your hand if a creature died this turn. Herd Migration lets you discard it to search for a basic into your hand and gain 3 life. Land Grant says that if you have no lands in hand, you can reveal your hand instead of paying its mana cost, so it's essentially free. Search your library for a forest into your hand. Dig Up lets you search for a basic land into hand and then shuffle, but you can pay its cleave cost to do slightly different. Reclaim the Wastes searches for a basic into hand and then shuffle, and you can kick it to search for 2 basics instead of 1. Traverse the Ulvenwald searches for a basic land into your hand, but if you've got Delirium, you can search for a creature or a land into your hand. Analyze the Pollen searches for the basic, but you can collect evidence to do a creature or a land instead. Seek the Horizon searches for up to 3 basics into your hand. Journey of Discovery lets you search for up to 2 basics into your hand, and you can play 2 additional lands this turn if you entwine it. Gaia's Bounty searches for up to 2 forests and puts them into your hand. And Nylea's Intervention searches for up to X lands into your hand, and then you shuffle, and it's got a second mode as well. Cards that search up specific types of land. Shard of Convergence searches for every type of land except for forest, and you reveal them, put them in your hand, and then shuffle. Farseek searches for the same Plains, Island, Swamp, or Mountain into play tapped. Spoils of Victory searches for just any kind of land and then puts it onto the battlefield. Into the North searches for a snow land into play tapped. Cosmium Confluence, you can choose different modes, but for the top one, we'll search for a cave onto the battlefield tapped. And then we've got Gaia's Balance. In order to play it, we have to sacrifice 5 lands, and then you search for a land of each basic land type and put it into play. Sack 5, get the exact Wooburg that you need. Now we're going to search for some deserts with Dance of the Tumbleweeds. You can pay its spree cost to do an additional thing, but the first one lets you search for a basic land or a desert onto the battlefield. Map the Frontier searches for up to 2 basic lands and or deserts onto the battlefield tapped. And Hour of Promise searches for up to 2 lands onto the battlefield tapped. And if you control 3 or more deserts, you create 2 zombies. So this one, you're basically just going to search for the deserts in this case. All right, now we've got Gate Searchers with Open the Gates. This is just pay 1, search for a gate into your hand, or just a basic. Circuitous Route searches for up to 2 basics and or gates on the battlefield tapped. And Explore the Underdark searches for 2 basics and or gates, puts them on the battlefield tapped, and then you take the initiative. This next section only has 2 cards, so we've got Sylvan Scrying and Titania's Command. Both of them let us search for any type of land. Sylvan Scrying searches for 1 into our hand, and Titania's Command second mode searches for up to 2 lands and put them on the battlefield tapped. In the next section here, we're going to look for Planeswalker specific cards. Nissa's Triumph searches for 2 forests, but if we control a Nissa Planeswalker, instead search for up to 3 land cards into your hand. And again, we got another Nissa card. Nissa's Encouragement searches for a card named Forest and a card named Brimbleweft Behemoth and a card named Nissa Genesis Mage, and you put them into your hand. Verdant Crescendo, I feel like all these have Nissa on them. Search your library for a basic onto the battlefield tapped, and then you search your library and a graveyard for Nissa's Artesian. And then Journey for the Elixir, this searches our library and our graveyard for a basic land and a card named Jiang Yanggu, and you reveal them and you put them in your hand. Now we got cards that search for lands for every player, like Tempt with Discovery. It's got Tempting Offer, so you search your basic land on the battlefield. Each opponent may do the same, and then you do it as many times as everybody said they would. Peer's Whim. You can choose friend or foe for each player, and then each friend searches for a land onto the battlefield tapped. Travel Through Karaderas has Council's Dilemma, so starting with you, each player votes for Redhorn Pass or Mines of Moria, and for each Redhorn Pass vote, search your library for a basic land onto the battlefield tapped, and then Mines of Moria does something else. Wave of Vitriol has each player sacrifice all artifacts, enchantments, and non-basic lands they control, and for each land sacrificed this way, you search for a basic land card onto the battlefield tapped. So I guess this is kind of a slap in the face, but you do get to search for lands. New Frontiers lets everybody search for X basic lands onto the battlefield tapped. The Great Aurora has each player shuffle all cards from their hand and all permanents into their library, and then you draw that many cards, and then you can put any number of lands from your hands onto the battlefield. So again, another backhanded slap, but you get those lands. Hypergenesis you have to suspend, and starting with you, each player may put an artifact, creature, enchantment, or land from their hand on the battlefield, and then you repeat this process until nobody does. So I guess you're putting lands out if you have them, which I guess strictly isn't searching for lands, but hey, you can get them with this. Clear the Land. Each player reveals the top 5 cards of their library and puts into play all lands revealed this way tapped, then removes the rest from the game. Cool. Collective Voyage. So everybody joins forces, and everybody can pay any amount of mana, and then everybody search for that many basics on the battlefield tapped. All right, last section is just kind of the leftovers where everything is just whatever. But we've got Animist's Awakening. We reveal the top X cards of our library, and we put all lands from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and the rest on the bottom, and we untap them if we have Spell Mastery. Bounty of Skemfar. We reveal the top 6 of our library, and we put a land card from among them onto the battlefield tapped, and an elf card from among them into our hand. Emergent Sequence. This is not what you'd think it would be. You search for a basic land onto the battlefield tapped and then shuffle, but it does become a creature, and it does not stop being a creature, so be careful with this card. Fork in the Road lets you search for 2 basics and reveal them. You put one in your hand and the other into your graveyard. Jadzi, Oracle of Arcavios, has a backside which says you may put any number of land cards from your hand onto the battlefield. And if you control 8 or more lands, you may discard a card, and you can return it to its owner's hand. Life from the Loam has Dredge 3, and you turn up to 3 target lands from your graveyard to your hand. Open the Way says X can't be greater than the number of players in the game for its X cost, and you reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal X lands. You put them onto the battlefield tapped. Path of the Animist searches for 2 basic lands onto the battlefield tapped, and then it does a thing with the plane chase stuff, but we don't care about that. Restore puts a land from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Scouting Trek searches your library for any number of basics, and then you set them aside, you shuffle your library, and then put those on top in any order. Slimefoot's Survey has Domain, so you search for up to 2 land cards that each have a basic land type and put them on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Then you can look at the top X, where X is the number of basic lands you control, and put one of them on top of your library and the rest on the bottom. Splendid Reclamation returns all lands from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. The Ring Goes South has the ring tempt you, and then we reveal cards from the top of our library until we reveal X lands, where X is the number of legendary creatures we control, and we put those onto the battlefield tapped. Venture Forth. We suspend it if we want, and we can exile cards from the top of our library until we exile a land. Put that card on the battlefield and the rest on the bottom, then you exile it with 3 time counters on it. And lastly, we've got Wild Endeavor. We roll 2d4 and choose 1 result. So we create a number of 3/3 beasts equal to that result, and then search for a number of basic lands equal to the other result, and put them onto the battlefield tapped. All right, this was very long-winded. Hopefully this helped. This is just kind of a descriptor video on what you can find for green mana ramp. Hopefully it helped. Thank you so much for watching, and make sure you pick up these cards in the TCGplayer affiliate link below, as well as your playmats from Playmats and Proxies as well. And make sure you join me next week for your weekly dose of magic.